Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Fresh Brewed Kentucky Politics. We've got a good show for you guys today. I am wearing my National Association for Gun Rights, better than the NRA, in my opinion. Actually believe in the Second Amendment fullest. Not that the NRA is per se bad, they just sometimes they stump for more gun control than they need to. So anyways, I wear my National Association for Gun Rights hat, but I thank you guys for joining me today. As always, if you're catching this on replay and you're not watching this live on YouTube or Facebook, this is a podcast available on Spotify, Apple, and wherever you listen to podcasts. I please ask you to go ahead and hit that share button down there in the corner, especially if you're listening to this live. Hit the share button down there. Let everybody know we're on today. We've got a good show. We've got Chris Wiest is going to join us here at the beginning to give us some updates on court cases. He's got a big one coming up on Monday as well. They also, of course, have the Supreme Court case coming up there in June. Beshear has announced a rollback on some of his mandates, which this kind of has to deal with too as well. Of course, we've got the masking, some interesting posts over the weekend, interesting articles out of Herald Leader, opinion posts, as well as the Washington Post had an interesting article we'll go through for you guys, and also talk about the First Amendment and Facebook banning Trump and everything else. So please give me a share. And if you want to support us, come by the coffee shop there, Brewed, Lexington, at the corner of Malibu, Nicholasville. You can also go online at brewedco.com, brewedco.com, and you can buy our coffee there, support us there. But for now, we're going to go live here with Chris. He's going to tell us about some of the cases he's got coming up. He's got a Monday, the 17th here, about a week out, exactly a week out, right? Case coming up, Chris. It's got a lot of big implications for the state. Do you want to give us a little breakdown on that?
Yeah, it's interesting just with the posture. I mean, this is the third governor COVID mandate case that followed the enactment of House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 2, and HJR 77. And what is interesting about it, I mean, as you're aware, there was the Franklin Circuit action in which the defendants all say, and this is the Judge Shepard case, hey, we're not proper parties. Legislators say they've got legislative immunity. The Attorney General says, hey, there's no case in controversy. I don't enforce this statute anyways. I'm not an enforcer. Judge Shepard issued a really strange opinion saying, yeah, I think there is a case in controversy. So that fight really is not even about the merits of the legislation and its unconstitutionality, even though the governor filed a lawsuit in Franklin Circuit Court saying that it was, unconstitutional. So,
yeah.
So that's the Franklin action. And, the governor in every single case, in our case in Scott County, has used that case saying, well, Judge Shepard enjoined the legislation. You can't enforce enjoined legislation. And there's actually a case out of the Kentucky Court of Appeals that basically says that is absolutely absurd. There's an entire couple paragraphs that say you can't enjoin legislation. Every circuit court has the ability to basically make their own judgments. Judge Shepard's, basically what he's done in terms of enjoining legislation has no force and effect. And that's the Mountain Truckers case. And we've argued that. The Scott County folks have argued that. So that argument is just sort of silly. And then you've got the Scott County case also up on a temporary injunction, which extended only to the plaintiffs in that case. And then the Court of Appeals stopped it and said, oh my gosh, grandma's going to die if we do what the legislature said we need to do. And we're going to engage in an extreme form of judicial activism, and we're going to put it on hold. And, unfortunately, I looked at that and I'm like, really? Like that's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see how that works out for you. But, I thought
he's brought how many more cases now since then? I mean, he's throwing a fit about the county fair board now not being under control of his office.
I look at this and I'm like, really? I know we've got, some liberalism that's infected our courts, but it takes guts to sit there and say, we're going to put on hold court orders that say the governor has to comply with recently enacted legislation. I mean, it undermines democracy, and I just, I don't think these judges realize people have had it and they're going to, I just think there's going to be consequences to this that some of the judges that are entering these crazy orders, don't fully realize right now. So Judge Clayton, who's the chief judge of the Court of Appeals, entered that order, sort of stopping the Scott County case. And with the posture that was going on at the time, this was maybe a month ago. The governor was playing games in Boone Circuit, as you're aware, because we tried to get you in addition to amended complaint with Beans. And I mean, he was like, I need more time to respond to HJR 77 because that was a surprise that you're trying to bring that into the case. And then he turns around the next day and he runs into Franklin saying, "Oh my gosh, you got to enjoin HJR 77 because of Boone County." And so I think it probably at some level offended the judge in Boone County when I think he now realizes he was being played by the governor's lawyers. And I don't imagine that's going to go over well for them, but that was the game he played, and the judge kind of gave him some extra time to respond to some motions we filed. So, that the Boone case though, Judge Brueggemann said, "Look, I think there's issues of law, and I don't think that this case is all that complicated. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this thing down for a bench trial on the merits. I'm not dealing with temporary injunctions. I'm just going to issue a final order in the case." And so that's May 17th. And so we're gonna do that next week. We're gonna put on some proof. Hasn't really some of this proof hasn't really been done before. We're gonna put on some proof next week, and we'll see how it shakes out. I imagine.
I know you've got some experts you're bringing in. We
Yeah,
threw up
yeah,
a
yeah. Let's not talk about my
GoFundMe.
whole strategy. Online, 'cause as you're aware, the governor pays people to monitor your
Sure,
social.
yeah. Just let people know to help pay
Yeah,
for
no,
those
it's gonna be.
expenses. There's a
Yeah, no, it's going to be
GoFundMe.
interesting. I think it's going to be an interesting trial next week. We have briefs that are due this Friday. I mean, it is we're going to be filing some monstrous pleadings. I share the governor's respect my authority. I'm the supreme executive. You can't tell me what to do brief that he filed last week.
Now, what was so I read it, of course. It's many
Yeah.
pages long. We read these things because we're nerds, but just break it down for those people that don't read, because the governor has a tendency to reply with hundreds of pages of information. He does not do quick responses at all, as we've seen in all the cases that you've been dealing with him in. What was the crux of his argument for those people that don't want to read the entire document?
Yeah, so let me boil it down. He made like 5 or 6 different arguments, and obviously, I've been working over the last week to get the response brief to it done. But first, he argues that under separation of powers, the emergency response is the governor's function only, and if it deals with emergency response, the legislature can't legislate in the area of emergency response, basically, or in any way that would limit what the governor thinks is the appropriate ability to engage in emergency response. And in part, he argues acre, but he sort of skips the whole passage about if the legislature doesn't like it, they can restrain the powers. Right? There's an entire passage on that in acre, and we're just not going to pay attention to that part of the decision. We're going to go and we're just going to talk about these general principles as opposed to the specifics about reining in the governor, right? And so,
of course, in acre, he even argued that, well, they could rein me in if they wanted to, so that's how I have permission to do all this.
Right. Yeah, that's why it's not an unconstitutional delegation, was their ability to end it. And now they come in and they end it, and he's like, well, no, they can't do that, right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with. And so, basically, I mean, if you take his response to its conclusion, he argues, one, he's the supreme executive. Two, he gets to determine emergencies. Only he gets to determine the length of emergencies. Only he gets to determine what the response is to emergencies. And the legislature can in no way, shape, or form legislate in this entire area involving these extraordinary powers to essentially make law. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it basically is, I mean, what he's arguing is he has the right to be an autocrat or a dictator, and nobody can stop him. And I mean, it is shocking on one level. And then,
what do you say on that? I've heard some people say, just on that one there, what is the ability of the legislator moving forward in the future? Because we didn't get here because Beshear was elected. We got here because of decades of pushing power over to the executives, and because the legislators don't want to do anything, and then the wrong guy, Beshear, gets in at the wrong time, takes advantage of all these things. But is there a law to be passed that somehow makes the governor prove there's even an emergency or defines what exactly is an emergency? I know it's hard because there's some things like you have to declare an emergency to get funding or the ability to do things or to get funding from the federal government sometimes. So is there any way that there's ever legislation to get that handled?
Yeah, I mean, my research, and we've been into the case law, fairly extensively, especially over the last couple of weeks, responding to the governor's brief, and frankly, getting ready to respond to the governor's brief because most of his arguments were not really that big of a surprise. Um, I contend that the legislature has the ability to basically constrain anything other than the governor's enumerated powers. And I don't mean his general sort of on the executive powers. I mean, like, they can't restrict his ability to pardon people with a statute. They can't restrict his ability to call out the militia or be the commander in chief with a statute. But, if it's not specifically listed and emergency response is not, then I think the legislature has the plenary ability to do whatever they want and put whatever conditions on it they want. There's some things they can't do. Like, they can't say, well, the governor can only declare an emergency, with the approval of a legislative committee, right? That's LRC versus Brown. That'll be unconstitutional. They can't delegate the legislative function to a committee of the legislature, like the LRC. They're not allowed to do that. But I think in terms of legislation and putting conditions on powers, I think they have, a very, very significant role to play, and that they've got a lot more authority than the governor wants to give them credit for. We'll see if the Supreme Court of Kentucky, is going to curtail what has been, almost 60 years of a great deal of legislative discretion to set government policy in all kinds of areas, and especially in the area of public health and welfare and emergency response. So, that's really what's at stake, is really the legislative function and our legislative ability to set policy through our elected officials, legislative branch. And, if you think about it, it was always set up to sort of be a tug and pull and compromise in two houses, and passing legislation was always supposed to be difficult as opposed to a single executive, because it was sort of policy, and it wasn't meant to sort of be one person, having their way over statewide policy. And yet, that's really what's at stake with these cases. So that's one argument that he's made. The funniest argument that he makes, though, is with House Bill 1. He says House Bill 1 is unconstitutional because it is delegated to the CDC and it incorporates CDC guidance into a statutory enactment. And the reason I find that so funny is if you go into his mandates, he himself has repeatedly incorporated CDC guidance since this thing began, right? You look at the mask mandate, incorporate CDC. You look at, all of these guidance docs and all of the mandates he's put out, it has references and links to CDC. So,
well, he's been saying all along, listen to the experts. So is he saying now that the CDC is now not an expert?
Well, he's saying the CDC is an unaccountable branch that nobody can, unaccountable agency that no one can listen to, and it can't be incorporated in the legislation. And I'm like, well, dude, you've been like doing that since like March of last year.
What is the Cabinet for Health and Family Services again?
CHFS? Yeah.
Yeah. Is that not an unelected body that is not? I'm just curious. I'm asking questions.
When you boil down his arguments, right, and you apply the standards that he's arguing to his own actions, one, it's hypocritical, but two, the Supreme, we made a lot of these Section 2 challenges to his orders, right? There's no notice. They come out with nobody knowing about them. It's unelected, bureaucracy. It's an improper delegation. And the Kentucky Supreme Court's like, no, in ACRE. So unless the Kentucky Supreme Court's going to apply a different standard to the legislature, which probably is entitled to more deference than the executive, unless you're gonna have different rules, and we know the left loves different rules, for themselves versus others, that argument is just absurd. And so, I look at that and I'm like, come on, man. And so, you'll see the response brief we're going to file this week. We take them to task. I'm going to file it probably. It's due Friday. I'm going to file it a little early because, the judge that we've got is an academic judge. who really will dig into the law, and he'll write a thorough opinion. And I think the sooner I get him our brief, the sooner he'll probably start working on it if he hasn't started already, which he probably has. But he's one of those smart judges that that you don't um, you see more in the federal courts and the state courts, sort of the judges that will sit down and really take the time to like research and issue a thorough opinion. We'll probably get that out of him. And I think it'll be helpful. At a minimum, the Supreme Court of Kentucky will see it. Depending on what he does, I think our case could get put up there. And I don't know. I don't know that we'll get combined into the June 10th argument. I don't know. I guess it depends on how quickly the judge issues his opinion. If we even get a brief or if they'll just hold it for decision. I don't know. Our record though will be different and more substantive than the other cases. And so I think in that regard, maybe they will take it because there's been a full proof and full trial that's been held in Boone County versus elsewhere. So, so we'll see. But that, May 17th.
Well, you're seeking to, the class certification on this one. For those who are unaware, unlike the Goodwood case where there was no class certification, it only applied to those in the case. But this case here has class certification asking. So if it's granted, it would then apply to the entire state, which if class certification is granted, I see the Supreme Court picking this up very quickly.
So they'll either pick it up or they'll stay it. I mean, they're going to do something, right? I mean, it's not going to it's not going to be, Judge Brigham enters an order and it just sits alone, unmolested by the appeals courts. I mean, it's going to, if it's a favorable ruling in favor of the businesses, I expect, all hell to break loose. And, it's interesting, that the courts are so quick to stop duly enacted legislation by supermajorities. It's in effect the courts thumbing their nose at the people of Kentucky, and that's a problem, I think. But we'll see. We'll see. And so it will be interesting to see kind of what happens. I don't think we're going to put some proof on next week. I don't anticipate getting a decision. Certainly, probably not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and next week. Maybe towards the end of next week, we might get a decision. Thursday, Friday, possibly. I think maybe the following Monday, the 24th, is more likely. That way, the judge will take the weekend and really work on it. That would be my guess. So we'll see. I mean that, and that's, that Beans is the plaintiff in that case. Beans Cafe, and we'll see how it goes.
So. Chris, do you want to take any questions too while we're wrapping up towards the end? You want to take like 3 questions?
Yeah, we can take some questions. And
so
we can,
guys,
and obviously the Supreme Court argument is June 10th. So,
And on June 10th. So guys, getting your 3 questions, first 3 questions. But putting that to the side, on June 10th, we have the Supreme Court hearing. Now, they're hearing, are they hearing the constitutionality of it, or are they more so hearing the case and controversy, whether or not Beshear, even in the first place, can be bringing this and going about this with the legislator?
I think they're going to have to hit all of it. I think the court really wants to probably dig into the constitutionality. I don't know that it's, I suppose it's plainly presented in both cases. I mean, but what's interesting is that nobody below, right? The governor in the Scott County case said, well, you're bound by Franklin Circuit Court, and never sort of raised his independent constitutional arguments that he raised in Franklin County in Scott, right? And so, the governor's sort of arguing that the Franklin Circuit bound Scott, and that's his defense to the Scott case, as opposed to doing what he did in Boone County, which is raising the substantive issues with a real case and controversy. So I guess, one observation I have is I'm not sure either case is a great vehicle to like address the constitutional questions that are presented by the governor's challenges. And it will be very plainly presented in Boone. So I'm interested. I think other lawyers are interested to see what does the Kentucky Supreme Court do with the Boone case, which is sort of following the other cases by 3 to 4 weeks. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
That is a kind of up in the air thing, I guess. Is you never know how it's going to play out. And also too, it's a common playbook of Beshear, and we've been seeing this to when he thinks he might be in a losing situation, he suddenly backs off from some of these mandates. So when he's seeing a case not going his way, you'll see him drop those mandates and then try to argue, well, it's not even pertinent anymore. Those
Yeah,
mandates
he
aren't even
argues.
in place, which doesn't mean once the case clears the court, he can't turn around and then,
Yeah, this is a little different though. I'm not sure that I, I don't know that the court still wouldn't take this up because of the importance of the issues and the frustration of legislative enactments by the lower courts. I mean, I just think, particularly Judge Shepard, and let's be clear, right? Like the governor, I think, has like brought at least two lawsuits, maybe three, over legislation he doesn't like. I mean, the Fair Board, right? He's all hot and bothered over that in Jefferson Circuit Court. Um, so there's a lot of tangential issues that I think are going on in these cases, and you know, I don't think he's going to be able to moot his way out of it, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, to your point, I mean, generally he will on the 11th hour surrender what he can't keep. I mean, we saw. I mean, how many federal court injunctions did we get? Right, we won the church case, and then he lifted the church thing and argued it was moot while also arguing the ability to the need to reimpose the church ban. I mean, he did that for like a year. With the
right.
protest thing, he kind of did the same thing. So, I mean, he sort of plays this game of it's moot, but I want the ability to redo it, and that I don't know if he's going to keep playing that game. I think it is interesting. He's lifted the hours of operation restriction. Um, at the end of the month. I suspect, that has something to do with the Boone case. I mean, and me maybe asking Dr. Stack some questions about why I was not aware that COVID could tell time, right? Because that's a question I've got for Dr. Stack. COVID can tell time. I wasn't aware of that, but um,
Well,
so
I mean, even even the commonplace like articles you read about it, like of course I've read quite a lot of articles about the curfew, and not a single article I've seen it's like here's the science behind the curfew. They're all like, it's to make it look like we're doing something, but it doesn't do anything.
I think that and the Barstool issue is probably the least defensible, and he lifted both of those today. So maybe it
Right.
is sort of a recognition of them not wanting to go into court next week.
I
I
mean,
imagine.
nothing majorly changed. Our case count, things didn't really change. I mean, we're only vaccinating like 1,500 days. So I do have some questions for you coming in if you want to get
Yeah,
those.
yeah.
So one of the questions is will this case make my mask go away? So,
Yeah, we are challenging the mask mandates, and we're seeking to lift them statewide. I want to be careful though. We were down in Florida for spring break, and there was no mask mandate down there.
sure.
And what we found was that individual restaurants and sometimes individual businesses had mask mandates, and they were making that decision for their business. And I think that's what we'll see a move to in Kentucky once the legal mandates are lifted is sort of voluntary mandates, voluntary from the business sense. Um, and the folks that argue, well, free market businesses should be able to decide. That's where I think this will move to. And obviously, subject to the same issue we've got today with the Americans with Disabilities Act claim, where there's a legitimate ADA claim. I mean, I see a lot of folks saying, "I just hate the mask mandates. I'm going to sue," and I'm like, doesn't work that way. You got a doctor's note that says you can't wear a mask? Well, no. And I'm like, well, you probably don't have an ADA claim. And then
Right.
sometimes they'll yell at me and say that I'm rotten because
Will
that's bad news. But I'm
if
like,
we end the mask mandate in the state. So this is a question a couple people have actually asked this
right.
as a follow up. If we end the mask mandate as the state, do kids in school coming into next year do they still have to wear masks? What do schools still have the ability to require masks if the mask mandate goes away? Public schools.
I've been looking into that, and I suspect, I mean, a couple things. Just because the governor's mandates have been lifted doesn't mean, one, that counties won't be able to do their own mandates, which I'm sure we'll probably see in Jefferson and Fayette in particular. And do they have that power? Is that a delegated power? Those will be the questions we'll be looking at. And school boards under the school board statutes, they do have the right to enact reasonable safety protocols under the school board statutes. So will schools be setting their own policy? And I think those are the issues we'll be grappling with, kind of going forward. And the short answer is right now I've not done a deep dive in sort of the fallback position because what I find is this stuff's like peeling away an onion, and the top layer is the governor's mandates. Let's peel that away, and we can sort of deal with the next problem when it comes.
Sure.
But I suspect, we'll be looking at those legal issues next. What can schools mandate, you know, et cetera.
Well,
And
and
we'll have
because
to begin with.
I mean, I just real quick, kind of personal thing. So it was a little minor protest, even though I know they're going to require him to. I send my son to school without a mask to make him provide it each time. It's just a minor protest. Which one time they sent him home wearing a mask. So it was a cloth mask, and then it had like plexiglass right around the mouth, so you could see their mouth. And I'm like, how? My son has asthma, and I'm like, how can you breathe through that? Like it's literally plexiglass right there. You're not breathing through that.
Sometimes they do that for the hearing disabled, right? So that you can see the verbalization, so that folks that have the
Right.
hearing
But you
disability.
can't breathe through it. And he said they gave it to him because they ran out of masks. But I think to your point, more importantly, is we're not seeing that. We're not seeing the schools really wanting to roll back a lot, or they're last to roll back. I mean, obviously, we don't see a lot of the kids.
So right now they don't even have the option, right? Like right
Right.
now there's a governor's mandate in place, and so and I mean it's kind of like a lot of local control issues. I mean, I think people are seeing who they elect the school board actually matters, through COVID, whereas before it was like, I don't know that a lot of people were paying attention as to who the school board, president was. So,
Well, the Fayette County School Board believes that we all elected the wrong person. Real article. The Fayette County School Board is looking at how to make themselves more diverse because they're all white people. And so Fayette County elected an all white board, and they're like, "This is a problem." I'm like, "You guys were the ones who ran."
who's getting voted off the island? Right.
I say Tyler Murphy, but that's just me.
I might be looking at a conflict of interest action, on him. I mean, there's just so much going on right now. We've been
if there wasn't as much, I mean, well, and I've said it out loud, and I've posted online. They delete their comments when I do, but we've got the screenshots of the Venmos they're sending around collecting up money to buy Tyler bourbon that is illegal. That's a gift of above $20. So and we've got the screenshots of those Venmos, and it's not. I haven't made a secret about it. Somebody tried to post something defending him because we had the petition about Tyler Murphy. And I go, what would you say if I told you I had screenshots that he's receiving gifts from the now school union in forms of alcohol, of them collecting up the money, and then all of a sudden their comment went away. It was weird. They deleted it. So, yeah. So, I mean, another question we had here was about vaccination. So, of course, there's a lot of concern that it looks like they're throwing the normal timeline of approving a vaccine. They're just going to throw it out the window because they're like, we have so much data already, which is funny because I saw Pfizer got the approval for 12 to 16. They come out and they say it's 100% effective. And I go, you know what? For that age group, you probably could have injected them with water and it'd been 100% effective as well, because they're just, here in Kentucky, we have one death in the age range 10 to 20, 0 if you look at the CDC because they only count confirmed, 1 if you look at the CHFS numbers, and that one there, as I understand it, had been dealing with trouble for a long time. So the question is, though, is that when that vaccine gets approved, now we have SB 8 that passed too as well here, first question, I guess, is can schools, public universities and public schools, require the COVID-19 vaccine despite SB 8 passing?
So let's roll back. And I've been doing vaccine rights work before vaccine rights work was hot, right? We did the chickenpox case in 2019 in Boone County, where it was an entire, I wouldn't say an entire, 80% of the school was not vaccinated. It was a traditional Catholic Vatican Mass parish, and they figured out that the chickenpox vaccine contained the MRC5 aborted fetal cell line, and they, as a matter of religious conscience, just said no. Um, and what they did there, they didn't force them to get the vaccine, but they did sort of keep all the kids that were unvaccinated or did not otherwise have the titers for varicella, which is chickenpox, out of school. And we filed a religious freedom, First Amendment case in state court. I wish I wouldn't have done it in state court. I wish I would have done it in federal court. That case is still pending against my friend, the Northern Kentucky Health Department, who they love me like I love them. The best news I got this year was that the director is leaving at the end of this year. I hope I had something to do with that. I wish I could take credit for it.
Are we
So
going to throw a celebration?
we are. I think when she leaves, I think we got to throw a party. What's wild is, I don't think a lot of people know this. I don't really like advertise it. My wife is a health professional, like big time, right? Like she's got letters behind her name, like she teaches, like she's legit, right?
Keep that
like,
quiet, Chris. We're keeping it quiet. I also don't tell people my sister's a high up administrator at a hospital and has her doctorate in chemistry. So
like there's some legit like dinner discussions where she's like looking at me like, what am I doing? But like she was actually on the board at this Northern Kentucky Health Department, and apparently the director at one point said, "I wish he was just more rational like his wife." And I thought that was kind of funny, right? she told somebody that, and I'm like, well, I stand for freedom. I always have, I always will.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I balance what you're saying with our rights.
right. Yeah. So back to the vaccines. Three things. The religious exemptions. They actually, I think, strengthen that for schools this session. So they cannot mandate it. You are allowed to use a religious exemption if you have a religious exemption. I don't know. I think there was a bill that they were looking at the conscientious.
Well, can I ask a question about that too? Just legal religious exemptions, and this is totally copyrighted. We're already working on this, so nobody even try. We're already there. I've just been waiting to ask you this. I'm going to ask you live. Now, let's say I found a church called the Church of Liberty. And let's say this church has a lot of religious beliefs. Not really about the creator, but they don't believe in forced vaccinations and forced masking and all these different beliefs that just coincide with the belief of liberty. Can that be a legal exemption if you're a member of a church that just states all these things that the church is?
So, generally speaking, the government is not allowed to second guess the religious beliefs or the validity of them. They are allowed to second guess whether or not you actually hold them, whether or not they're sincerely held. But generally, I find they don't even challenge that because that's a very, very sticky wicket. I don't even think you have to do that, right? Like, there's existing religious doctrines out there that I'm aware of that are anti-vaccine for a lot of reasons. The whole fetal cell development of vaccines, is something that a lot of people hold near and dear to their heart. How much fetal cell involvement can there be? J&J uses fetal cell lines to actually manufacture the vaccine. And I think there's some Catholic bishop statements out there from U.S. Conference of Bishops that say, the J&J vaccine is bad for that reason, but the Pfizer and Moderna don't have the same moral and ethical concerns. I guess my point is, I think you're allowed to, to raise that. And I did check Senate Bill 8. Again, if you have a religious objection to vaccines, you fill out the form, and they're not allowed to second guess it. There's some public accommodations issues on religious freedom as well. I think it might be part of Title VII, which is the whole, race discrimination, sex discrimination code. But you're not allowed to do religion either, although typically the Supreme Court has not sort of given that the full force that they have, the race and sex discrimination. Sure. There is some appetite and some dissenting opinions and some concurring opinions that suggest that maybe the U.S. Supreme Court's willing to put some teeth back into it. And so if somebody's got a legitimate religious objection to a vaccine, I think that's the angle. And what's interesting is, we sent a letter out to Berea College. I think everybody's aware Berea, was out in the paper. Look at us. We're mandating vaccines. and what followed that letter was another letter from Berea to their community saying, "Look, if you've got a religious objection, we'll honor it." And so I thought that was really interesting. That sort of followed. I think that'll be the next battle line. I do think we're going to see full approval. It's being rushed. And the guy that I wrote the Berea letter with is a guy by the name of Aaron Seary, who's probably one of the preeminent, along with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., one of the preeminent vaccine rights attorneys that does this work nationally. I've known Aaron for probably 2 or 3 years. Just some there's just not a lot of lawyers that do a lot of liberty litigation. I've known Aaron through that, and Aaron is indicated. They've been involved with slowing down the entire vaccine rollout. They've been filing multiple petitions with the FDA. They're going to do it again. They're going to try and monkey works this thing up and just say there's not enough data for full approval. We may be looking at
like, of course there is. We just had you all take it under the experiment.
Right. I mean, look at all of our guinea pigs.
Look at all these guinea pigs out here.
Look at the control group.
There's tons of data.
So, Aaron, I think Aaron may be looking at an action in court after this approval to sort of really monkey wrench this thing up. And I know that they're looking at an omnibus petition to slow down the Pfizer. The other thing that's interesting about it, right? What does that do? Pfizer went and filed. What does that do for the Moderna and the J&J, right? Because they're under an EUA. Well, one of the reasons you get an EUA is there's not a full approved product on the market. So as soon as you approve J&J, as soon as you approve Pfizer, now I think you have to vacate the EUA for Moderna and J&J, and you can imagine the fiasco that's going to cause. And so there's some thought that the FDA may hold full approval until at least Moderna has their full petition, which I think is a few weeks out up there, and maybe J&J, I don't know, but there's some other implications with these approvals in terms of what it does with the existing EUA approvals, and I think that's interesting too. So, we're monitoring that. I'm monitoring that because a lot of our pushback to employers and schools and everyone else has been it's EUA, you can't mandate it. Once it's not EUA, what does that mean?
Right. I think it's worth noting too. We're going to make a post about this as soon as we get off, but I don't know if you're aware, Chris, that OSHA just changed its guidelines on vaccination, and OSHA says it changed it like today that if you require your staff to be vaccinated and there's side effects or injuries that come from that vaccination, it is a recordable event of a workplace injury under OSHA, which means you, the employer, now can be liable. If you require the vaccine and there's a negative reaction to it, you as the employer can be liable for that vaccination. At least your workers' comp can be. Right?
Well, you got to report it. And you're right, it's workers' comp, which is sort of no fault anyways. It will probably hit workers' comp. It'll probably hit workers' comp premiums to the extent there's side effects, which is interesting, right? Because you can't sue the manufacturer. The feds have a vaccine injury program that is really it is difficult to manage. Like I said, Aaron does a lot of that, does a lot of the VAX court work, but it's a subset of the federal court of claims, and there's a whole claims procedure. And they sort of, if they recognize a particular side effect after you have enough of it, then when you have the side effect, they don't even get into fault. It's just, oh, you got a side effect from a chickenpox vaccine, and this side effect we recognize, and therefore we're going to pay you for it. So, it's sort of it's almost like workers' comp in that it's no fault once you get into the VAX court stuff. But I mean, it's an interesting sort of developing area. And I think to your point, I do think you're going to see employers, look at that. Here's the question though, the Kentucky Senate just passed a law. I think it was like Senate Bill 5. This says employers can't have any liability related to COVID. Does that shield employers from liability if they mandate vaccines?
And it depends. OSHA's
I
saying
think you
it's
got to look
not
at that
even
issue, right? Is there unintended consequences from giving employers all this immunity? They sovereign immunity, no less, in the Senate Bill 5, and which I look at the legislature and I'm like, why are you guys doing half of what you're doing? It's just because the Chamber of Communists is in your ear, telling you to do stuff,
right?
And I'm just like,
it's all these groups. Everybody's got to realize all these groups favor their big money people,
right?
And also too as well, what you have to remember is that, and this is when I see the governor talking about, oh, we're just encouraging private business, everything else. I want to rip my hair out and be like, you can close them right now at a snap of a finger. You don't even got to prove it, right? There's an implied threat when the governor's sitting with you at the table saying, you really need to help us get these people vaccinated. There is an implied threat, especially if you're a large employer, that I can shut you down just like that. Click my one signature right now and you're closed. And if there's, we talk about all the time, we people in Liberty, we talk about the free market. The problem is in the free market, the incentive is the customer. The profit incentive is the greatest incentive. But when you have somebody like coming along saying, hey, this may not be good for your profits, but you won't even get to exist unless you do what I say, your incentive goes away from the profit because if you don't exist, you can't make a profit.
I mean, yeah. And look at the winner and loser picking that we've seen over the last year, the special interest sort of, process into some of the governor's mandates. I mean, when the events started to open for horse racing, that I had the Speedway, the Florence Speedway, that couldn't do car racing, but horse racing was allowed. And I mean, you see all of that. And so, but it is you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And so when the governor says you're going to go and mandate this to your employees, you're going to offer incentives. I think it's interesting. I saw today, though, I guess now they're giving out free lotto tickets.
Yeah, Kroger and stuff, they're giving out free lotto tickets, which, I mean, hey, you're already gambling with your life getting that vaccine. No, I'm kidding. You're not. Okay. It's not the same gamble, all right? I'm not a doctor, okay? But I made that joke to my wife, who's like, they're encouraging gambling now? Like, and I'm like, well, they're already gambling with the side effects. You might as well get some money while you're at it. But yeah, I mean, well, West Virginia was handing out $100 savings bonds. New York had a joints for jabs program where you got free on 420. You got free joints, weed out there in New York if you'd been vaccinated, right? I mean, they're trying all kinds of different things. I guess they've really taken that to believe, it's these white poor conservative dummies that won't get vaccinated, and we know they all play the lottery. So maybe if we, get in here not realizing that it's not that odd. It's not dummies.
It'll be a box of cigarettes and a handle of whiskey, right? I mean,
well, it can't be menthol though, Chris. It can't be menthol, Chris. Okay.
Menthol. Oh, I forgot about Biden's menthol.
No menthol. Okay, that's Marlboro Red for you. All right.
Not to digress, but if you look at our drug policy and you look at I mean, honestly and truly, I mean, our drug policy has disproportionately affected the impoverished and the, minority communities, because generally, right, the rich white guys peddling the cocaine aren't the ones typically getting caught, right? I mean, honestly.
Well, and also too, it's not even that. I mean, let's call spade a spade. Not, I'm rich. I'm not rich at all. I just now have a lot of lawyer friends, and there's a situation where I got a speeding ticket and it was no sweat. Wasn't that worried about it because I called up a lawyer friend of mine, by the name of Chris Wiest, and I was like, hey, I got a ticket. I wasn't speeding. Can you help me out here? And anybody who's been on those calls, you go to the front of the line, the lawyers get handled first, and you end up being able to kind of speed through the system and a lot of times get dismissed compared to, and that's why I think we got to take if you really care about impoverished minorities, you got to take a good hard look at the laws we have and say, is this really something I want to potentially destroy someone's life over? I mean, even a speeding ticket, if you don't pay it, you get your license taken away. You get your license taken away. Can't go to work without breaking the law. You get arrested on your way to work. Your life's over, right? And so I think that's something that we've got to take a good hard look at these laws.
I mean, yeah, right. I mean, it sounds good. We're going to stop this dangerous product in the market. We're going to keep people from it. But what you don't realize is that every single law is enforced, to your point, at the point of a gun ultimately. And you're going to ruin, probably disproportionately, the communities that you've been pandering to, Biden, for like a year. And I'm just like, why? What? I generally find freedom sort of works itself out in the end. When you allow people the ability to make the right choices, and sometimes people are like, well, Christian moral values. And I'm like, well, okay, maybe I've got this all wrong. And maybe my understanding of the Bible is all wrong. But I kind of thought Christ wanted us to choose him and make good choices, in accordance with him, which requires us at bottom to have the freedom to be able to do that to begin with, right? Versus the government sort of locking everybody up, right? The old, Parks and Rec, right to jail, right to jail, right? I mean, it seems like, it seems like that's that's the Biden Bashir response. Oh, you don't do what I want. You don't shut down your restaurant, right to jail, right to jail. So, I look at this and I'm like, come on. By the way, unintended consequences. I don't know if you've noticed. Beans had a post today, and we're seeing it kind of all over. We've got a hiring problem right now in the sense that like employers want to hire workers, and workers don't want to go to work, and workers don't.
I mean, people complain to me. Brood doesn't have that problem per se because Brood has interesting work requirements that is different than most places. And so if other places require things that we don't require, and then those people don't like those things, they sometimes work. It, could be free coffee or, stuff, right? Just random things. But
liberty, right?
Right. Liberty. We offer a lot of liberty to our staff. And we have, but I am aware of situations, or even at other companies I work with. I don't just have a coffee shop. I do other things. Having big hiring problems.
I mean, look at Beans. So Richard, mutual friend of yours, mutual friend of mine, client of mine, right, was out today and he did a post. He had to shut his drive-through down today because they didn't have staff. And
well, hold on here. He's got like 14 kids. Could he not like grab? No, I'm just joking.
So his daughter, Richard's daughter, like helps manage that restaurant.
Right. I know. I was making a joke about his kids. Most of his kids are too young.
I mean, but my point, and I think it's a legit point, right? I mean, here the government is, it's handing out all this money. Mm-hmm. So if I'm sitting at home and I haven't done the math, but if somebody's hiring at $10 an hour times 40 hours a week, that's $400. And if I can,
well, and Kentucky, I made a post about this too. Kentucky has a interesting problem with this, and this is what a lot of people don't know. A lot of other states, they max out around 200-ish, 250-ish of their workers' comp benefit. So you throw on the other 300 and you're at 500 and some. It's still higher than if you're making $10 an hour, but it is, I don't know. But here in Kentucky, we have a big problem because our max is $500 in I believe $69. So you top in the other 300, you're talking $839. We're not just, and like I said, we made a post about it where we did the math. We're not just talking about, well, you just need to pay more. No, you don't understand. If I'm paying people, because normally unemployment is like 50-ish%. So if I was paying people $12 an hour, a good pay rate, or even $15 an hour, they were receiving at $15 an hour, 40 hours a week, that's $600. So they'd normally receive $300. But then you throw in the $300 kicker, and then you're making just as much, $600 a week, as you would if you're working full time at $15 an hour.
I mean, the math is almost an effective hourly rate of $21 an hour, right? I mean, right. That's highly skilled labor. Like,
right.
Like I mean, it's hard, and why, if I'm making that, am I going to go out and work, right? Particularly,
well, I mean, you got to pay me far beyond that too. Right. I mean, if I'm making $600 to sit on my butt, you better be paying me around $1,000. And I can't fault those people. I'm not going to make demons out of those people taking advantage of that. I would do it. I'm just going to be honest, guys. I would do it. Okay, I would. Get mad at me all you want to. I would do it. I've got a kid. I wouldn't have to worry about that. Let's not make demons out of them. The government set them up in a situation where it's like, well, granted, I wouldn't do it because I don't, like that stuff. But, the government, I can't fault them for doing it. The government set them up in a situation where your incentive is to stay home.
Right. I mean, that's the problem. And I think, until we, I mean, I don't even think it's enough to, right now, I mean, I think they've reinstituted the requirement that you have to look for work and you have to document it, right? Now, we all know that that gets gamed.
I've seen it be gamed. I've been victims of it being gamed as
Right.
the employer.
We all know that gets gamed. But at some point, the supplemental payments just have to stop. And I think, I'm not sure how long that they're supposed to continue, but until
I
they
think till
stop.
the end of they were extended for 6 months in February. So like they're supposed to last, I believe, till the end of July,
So
August.
people aren't going back to work till August. I mean,
Right.
that just is a fact. And you look at the cost of that, and I'm not talking about the tax dollars and whatnot that's being used to supplement it, but I'm talking about the economic cost of businesses not sort of re-engaging the economy and the engines of the economy by, again, I mean, even good factory work with decent bennies, might be paying out, 10, $18 an hour, $20 an hour. I mean, you're not going to go and take that job if you can sit at home and get the same amount, right? So, I
Well,
mean,
and
we're going to
also
have a
too, I
higher.
mean, you're getting your a lot of times you're getting your free health insurance too as well. That's
Yep.
not coming out. I believe you don't have to pay Social Security on that. So your net amount. So if I pay you 600 at work, and you're paying 600, that net amount is much lower. And it gets even worse too for those who are unaware of what a problem this creates, especially for like Social Security, which is already in a problem. Employers match what you put in. So if you're now not contributing to Social Security, and if you're working, you would be contributing to Social Security, and the employer contributes to Social Security. So the government's actually missing out on a lot of taxes while they're shelling out more money, which creates a debt problem, because it's almost like they're paying you for them not to make anything.
Right. Right.
And I've seen people say this too. A lot of people have been saying, I don't want to go back to work until they don't require masks anymore because I can't wear masks all day. And I'm like, hey, I can't fault you for that, right? As soon as that mandate gets removed, I think that'll play a lot into it where and it'll become, you work somewhere that I think if anything, you'll see the mask mandates falling away and you won't see vaccine. And that's the one thing against employers making you get vaccinated even once it's approved. Right now, our best defense is it's hard to find people. So why would you want to cut yourself out of employees by saying you got to wear masks, and you got to be vaccinated, and 40%, 50, I think it's 53%, something like that, 47% of the population is not vaccinated. So you're cutting out like half your workforce right there.
Yeah. I mean, again, I mean, we got to restart the engines. And, I see the governor's posts about, well, strategic approach and strategic mandates.
You
And
know
by the
what?
way,
And
look at
and
us
the
build back
sales
better.
receipts were going up during the lockdowns too because people didn't stop spending money. So you still collected your 6% sales tax. They were just spending money at large corporate businesses. And, anyway, I'm sorry. It annoys me when he posts those things. And it's black and white photos. Like, can you get another freaking filter? Please. All you have is your black and white filters. And you look at it, you're like, man, I look like Kennedy. And you're like, I'm going with that one every time because it's the Kennedy filter. And so, I'm like, get a different filter and, stop patting yourself on the back because businesses have been destroyed.
It's a funny thing. I have some friends that are like died. It's gonna maybe surprise you. They're like died in the wool, hardcore Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
Have been their whole lives, are true believers. And I mean, I enjoy debating. I enjoy debating with people that don't share my point of view. And honestly, in law school, I mean, that went on frequently. Like, sometimes you'll see some of my law school classmates post on some of my posts thinking that, like, I'm nuts, right? Because, like, how can you be conservative? Although I respond and I'm like, well, if you're not liberal at 21, you don't have a heart, and if you're not conservative at 40, you don't have a brain. So, that's my that's my response. But, I mean, I think that, it is interesting because the discussions that I have had, and I'm not talking about the people that are like milking the Bashir administration and making money off of some of this stuff, sort of the dirty sort of underbelly of, I'm going to
Right.
take
Like the
my
Grimes
hairdresser
and
with
the,
unemployment
yeah.
and I'm going to kind of, no bid contract this. I'm not talking about the people that are on the receiving end of that, which is sort of funny because I had a lawyer who was at a law firm that received some no bid work from Bashir. They got really mad at me and like stormed off I said, I'm unfriending you. And I'm like, well, my Facebook page isn't an airport. You don't need to announce your departure. So, but his law firm was making money off the Bashir administration, significantly, right? I mean, they've been, significantly sort of pandering, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the kind of more of the other Democrats and what's interesting, right? Matt Jones just had a post to Bashir, reopen the economy. Matt Jones is hardly a conservative bastion.
No,
anything, right? I mean, and in DC's,
but he does own a bar.
Does own a bar,
and he sees those numbers.
so what I think is interesting though is I've had these conversations with folks who really, all things being equal, vote for the Democrat. They voted for Biden, but they're like, I'm not voting for Andy Bashir in his reelection, and they've said that to me. And they're like, I don't agree with everything that you're doing. Like, I think you're wrong on the mask stuff. I think you're wrong on the vaccine stuff, but I think you're right on the lockdown stuff and sort of the picking and choosing. And I thought that those comments and those discussions were interesting. And these are, some of them are like business owners that have been hurt by Bashir. And so,
right.
Back to the old whose ox is getting gored. I mean, you weren't that politically active really at all until, you tried to take your business away.
I was politically aware. I mean, I was knowledgeable. I didn't jump into the reason why this worked is because I was already knowledgeable, but I wasn't like out there posting a whole lot of things on Facebook
about the governor being a tyrant, right?
No. So, I wasn't delivering coffee to the mansion. I wasn't doing a lot of things, right?
But it was your ox getting gored. So sometimes I see people and they're like, I think Bashir's going to win re-election, and I'm like, I don't think so. Like, I think he's just made too many people mad. And like, I think, we're starting to see, the booing at the Kentucky Derby, right? The left was absolutely cheering when that happened to Matt Bevin. And now it's happened to Andy Bashir, right? I mean, you're into his term and people are like, this dude's got to go. And like, I think.
Well, and also too, I think it's, and I think the thing about the mandates, and this is one thing I've realized this today. So I was at a shop, a swim shop, and we were talking about, because my son's doing swimming, and we were talking about COVID restrictions of last year, about 6 foot distancing in the pool, because they were talking about how chlorine is all going to be cranked up this year. They're going to put real high because they're worried about COVID. And I'm like, literally 3 weeks ago, the CDC just said soap and water kills COVID. Fine. Like, you don't need to crank up your chlorine any more than it already is. And we're like, I know it's stupid. You think about last year where we had to be 6 feet apart in the pool, because if you work in pools, you've got fumes and things coming off, the water droplets sink down. Long story short, chlorine is killing a lot of this stuff. Being 6 foot distance in a pool made no sense. And in the same way that, when they're sitting there saying, everybody needs to in restaurants, they come out the guidance that says everybody needs to be washing their hands. We already wash our hands all the time. Like, what are you talking about? You go to the bathroom, you wash your hands, you handle food, you wash your hands,
You wear gloves.
You wear gloves, right?
You got a hairnet and a mask if you're in
right.
the kitchen. Yeah.
Right. Like, it's like normal stuff we already did. So the point of it is that I may not be an expert in infectious diseases, but I'm an expert in how a restaurant operates. So when you make these mandates about how a restaurant, things to do with a restaurant, and I'm like, that makes no sense, because I know restaurants. So this gentleman that I was talking to, he knows pools. So when they were making rules about swimming, he's like, that makes no sense because I know about pools. And so, and everybody in their own life knows that. Like, take masking, for example. I was talking to you about this the other day. My father's a certified mask through OSHA. And he's like, asbestos and lead, we are trained, if you're around that, the masks they have you wearing for COVID don't work. OSHA wouldn't approve them, and those particles are so much bigger. And so, though people may not be infectious disease experts, I put that in quotations, you can't see it, but other people are experts in their industry, and they know what they do in their industry, and they know their sanitation efforts. They know the kind of stuff they do. And so, I don't know. The point is just, I think that's the breakdown. More and more people realize, like, okay, this doesn't make sense at all. It just doesn't make sense at all. I think
people have had enough. I mean, I think when this started, everybody was scared, right? I mean, it was significant. I mean, I'll never forget. It was 2020 legislative session was winding down, and I got a call from Savannah Maddox, And she was like, I'm afraid the governor's going to go off the deep end. Like, what do we need to do to stop him? And I'm like, you take a hard look at 39A and here's some recommendations. And she got a bill in, and as you're aware, they went nuts on her, right?
Yeah.
The leadership did, the governor did. She was going to kill everybody, and and then she turned out to be like predictive of like everything that happened, because once they left, right, it was Bashir on a tirade, and it didn't stop. And the church thing, I think the protest thing that he did, the travel ban, just all the stuff that he was doing, right, was just insane. Like, non-elective medical care, is banned unless it's an abortion clinic. Just everything like he did was just all about the politics. And
Right.
and then we got the Stack deposition in June of 2020, where Stack admitted that the governor was making value judgments about what was important and what wasn't, sort of at bottom. Like that was what was driving this. And so, it just. But I look back over like the last year and a half, and I'm like, my gosh, like look at what we've been through. And now, now you're starting to see politicians that weren't all that, against the stuff at the time. They were sort of picking and choosing, what they were against and what they weren't, at the time. I don't think anybody really supported the state police going into the churches on Easter Sunday. I don't think anybody was supportive of that, but like a lot of this other stuff, very, very supportive. And
well,
we
think,
found.
Well, I think as it progresses, people get more supportive looking back. Today in the Washington Post, or Sunday, Washington Post, they ran an article all about, it was called "To Mask or Not to Mask." And, you have excerpts in this of people being like, people saying, well, I know I don't need to wear a mask, and I know it's not safe, but I don't want people to think I don't care. I don't want people to think I'm a Republican, or I'm afraid. So they're literally admitting that they are disengaging with the science. This is not about science anymore, right? And in this article, they're talking all about how they're admitting that it's all a virtue signal. And I think on the masking side of things, that is, I think, a lot of people's concern moving forward, is that the masking thing, because politics used to not be talked about, right? And then you start putting something on that almost said whether you're a lefty or a righty, right? And now it became, everybody knew your politics the moment they looked at you.
So, it's interesting, right? By the way, I have my things that I agree with him on and my things I disagree with him on. But, Senator Rand Paul went out, got, as you're aware, got COVID, unfortunately, and got over it, and got, of course, the science is that when you overcome a disease, that you have antibodies to it. And of course, your body's learned how to fight it and fight it off. And increasingly, we're seeing studies that show that, in fact, when you catch COVID, you actually obtain, it confers immunity on you for some period of time.
Sure.
And, and Senator Paul's point has been, if you're immune, if you've gotten the vaccine or you've otherwise caught COVID, why do you need to wear a mask? I'm not going to wear a mask, right? And Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat, made the statement, that what Senator Paul is doing just doesn't present the right image. So which is a acknowledgement that this is not about the science. It's not about stopping COVID. It's all about the virtue signal.
Well,
you
even have here in Kentucky. So I was talking to somebody that was there for the photo shoot that happened before the protest, right? There were some people there.
Oh, the knife-wielding terrorist.
The knife-wielding Karen terrorist, right? The Bashir-backed butcher, as we've coined her. And there's a gentleman there that actually is more on our side of things, that was sitting down across the street in the grass with the family dog, everything else. And I guess Brittany, I always say it wrong. Brittany Bashir walked across with the dog, and then the governor came across, and I guess at first he wasn't wearing a mask. And he was like, oh, do you want to get a picture? Which is kind of weird. He's begging him to take a picture with him. But he's like, do you want to get a picture? And this guy's like, you know what? Screw it. We'll take a funny photo. I'm going to post it up later and talk crap, right? In his mind. And so the governor then puts on pulls out a mask. And he's like, oh, I got to put on this mask. It's not really needed. And actually, my orders don't even say it, but pictures travel far, and you got to put out the right image. And he puts it on and takes the picture. So even the governor, 2 seconds before he's taking these photos, was unmasked. And he literally just put them on for the photo op. And it's like, those are the kinds of things where it's like, that is so detached from science. And I can't trust you that you're following the science when you're literally doing things because, well, I don't want them to think I'm a Republican, because that became, as I posted the other day, that became the anti-MAGA hat. Republicans had the MAGA hat, Democrats have their mask. And that's kind of where it's facing off.
So it's interesting. I've been friends with State Senator John Schickel for a really long time. And I really like Senator Schickel. I don't always agree with all of his votes, but I really like him. And I think that, he's got a public servant's heart. And he had a fundraiser over the summer. Robert Stivers and a bunch of other people went, and I went, and I wrote him a check. I mean, I've represented him on some issues, and he's just a good guy. And so, I'm happy to support him, even if I don't always agree with him. And so I was there, and, people were masked for like the entire event. And then they went to go take a photo towards the end, right? This was still like July, August-ish.
Right.
Still summer. People were still COVID freaking out, right? And like, I'm trying to remember. Did I wear a mask that event or not? I don't remember if I did or not. But the mask came off for the photo, and the photo got posted. And the next thing you knew, there was KDP, the Kentucky Democratic Party, issuing this press release about, look at these terrible Republicans. They're all going to kill grandma, right?
Right.
The mask was off for these guys to take a photo for like less than 30 seconds, which, by the way, if we want to talk about science and we really want to look at how COVID spreads, and I've been up and down the studies since this thing started, it's 15 minutes of close proximity exposure, typically in an indoor, non-ventilated area that typically has the greatest chance of spreading COVID if you're in proximity to somebody who has it. It is not taking off your mask for 2 minutes to go get a photo and then putting it back on. But of course, I look at this screeching that the KDP put out about how, grandma was going to die. And I'm like, at that point, I figured out this was all about the virtue signal. From the beginning, this was about the virtue signal. And this entire, I'm not saying that the pandemic or COVID's not real. I think it is real. I mean, people, have lost their lives, particularly if they had underlying, comorbidities. But I think like everything in politics, never let a crisis go to waste. And the left in particular was hell-bent on not allowing this crisis to go to waste. And, I think that's a lot of what we've had.
Well, and I think too, as well, let me know if you think this is accurate, and this is what we'll end on. Okay. I've been saying this on my podcast. I don't know how often you listen to my podcast, but we talk all the time. So it doesn't matter. You hear my voice all the time. Anyway, so I think Bashir has linked it in his head that vaccines equal re-election. He thinks, I believe, that if he can get X percentage vaccinated, he can turn around during election season and say, I got you all vaccinated. I saved your lives. You put that shot in your arm because I told you to. Now vote for me. And I see the same thing with masking, where there maybe because they're attaching that as anti-Republican, if I can force everybody to wear a mask that I can, and they start to believe it's in what I'm saying, they'll start to hate all those dirty Republicans that don't believe in masks. What do you think?
So I think everything the governor has done has been political in nature, right? I mean, from the value judgments to allowing the abortion clinics that heavily funded this campaign to remain open while shutting down other non-elective medical procedures that may or may not have been involved in killing a congressman's wife in Kentucky. I mean, I look at the death of Congressman Barr's wife, and I can't help but think the Governor Bashir's mandates didn't have a hand in that. I mean, I think they might have, right? I mean, everything this guy has done from the beginning, every mandate he has issued, every winner he has picked has been political. If you dig into it and you look at who his campaign donors were, look at the lieutenant governor and the handling of unemployment and the special interests that were sort of, getting jumped to the front of the line. There was a huge expose. It was in and out of the paper in a day, right? We've got,
McNamara admitted he wanted that 100 staff LRC offered. The governor's administration wouldn't take it because they didn't want to work with Republicans.
Got Hillary Clinton, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's that issue. I mean, Epstein. I mean, depending on how you want to look at it. I mean, I think that there's a dirty underbelly that with this governor. I mean, winner and loser picking. I mean, sort of special interest, no big contracts. I mean, it's all about enriching friends and family. And for him, I think he wants to portray himself as the quote unquote wartime governor, right? with this war against COVID to boost himself into reelection. And the problem is, I think, generally speaking, the public has kind of had enough, right? And I think we saw that. I mean, the Kentucky Derby, right? People are dressed up. It's an affluent crowd. People are dressed up. Ladies wearing the nice hats. It's a big event. They're out in public. Folks go to the Derby and generally speaking, I would bet, more than half of the Derby, maybe significantly more than half of the Derby, are probably not registered Republicans, right? Probably most of them are registered Democrats.
I mean, Ted Cruz was there.
Well, I mean, but no, seriously, right? I think most of the people in that stadium were Democrats or left-leaning independents. I mean, it's Louisville. It's kind of drawing the affluent, the limousine liberals, as a friend of mine who's a Democrat likes to call them. That's who mostly attends the Derby. I'm not talking about the infield, right? Where you and I would go to sort of, hang out.
No, I got offered a spot in a box. I just didn't take it.
Oh, did you?
It didn't sound enjoyable to me.
For
that exact reason. I was like, I'm going to be around limousine liberals all day.
Right. But then look at the reaction, right? The reaction was, here's this giant booing, right? And so I think that for a governor who has prided himself on sort of playing politics with all of this from the beginning, that had to be at least a little bit sobering, right? I mean, maybe just a little. I don't know. I mean, I watched him on TV.
He almost dropped that trophy.
I mean, you could tell, like, he was a little shaken. Like, what just happened? Like, what just happened? And like, I mean, maybe it's finally starting to like come home to him. I mean, I kind of think, the Republican Party of Kentucky, I think there was a deliberate mindset of not impeaching the governor, in part because he's a really good boogeyman to fundraise off of, and he's a really good boogeyman to try and elect more Republicans because we're not them, and look what this awful governor did, right? I think they left him in office on purpose for political reasons. I think deep down, if you really push those impeachment committee members, they would probably tell you that there were sufficient grounds that if they really felt like it, they could have impeached him. I think they made the decision not to for politics. And
arresting people for going to church tends to get you impeached in America. I mean,
it should, right? And I mean, my reaction to sort of RPK's sort of stance of we're not going to impeach him is that's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it works out for you, because now you go to their Facebook page, every time they're looking for the $2 income tax checkoff, people are like, no, like, we know what you're doing.
Right.
Everything you did was basically, political, and we don't like it. Like, stand up and fight for us and stop playing politics. And that goes doubly for the governor, but it includes the establishment politicians from RPK as well.
I think they're right and they're wrong. I think they're 100% right that it will be better for the Republican Party that he's in there. Republicans will gain more seats and more control and power. I think they're wrong to think they'll still be there to do it, because I think a lot of them are going to get removed in the process because people just don't forget. I mean, they don't forget. And even I post up reminders, and you'll see these rhinos come on and argue. I mean, you'll see Regina Huff still trying to defend HB 208, despite the fact that she's like, no, they can only close for 5 NTI days. And I go, okay, what about this? And I show Fleming County and Boyd County going back to NTI only. Like, Fleming's going back for 10 days NTI. And I'm like, explain that. Explain that. If your bill did exactly what you say it did and not what we said it did, explain that. And
I mean, you know how this goes, right? So the legislators go to LRC. LRC drafts them a bill. The legislators say, a bill that does X, Y, and Z. LRC drafts them up a bill that sometimes does X, Y, Z, it sometimes does ABC, and the legislators take it on face value.
Karen used to work for LRC, the knife wielder.
I know,
she worked for LRC. Those are the people that are writing your bills. That person who pulled a knife on a peaceful protester was writing your legislation, guys.
Which is why, I was working with probably 4 or 5 different legislators this session on liberty-related legislation. And they would send a bill over. I would sometimes give them language. And it would come back from LRC and like not do what it was supposed to do, right? And I'm like, at some point you figure out that like LRC is not there to like do what the legislators tell them to do. Like they're doing one or two things, and I'm not sure which. I haven't figured it out yet. They're either doing what leadership tells them to do, which is its own sort of problematic deal, or they're pursuing their own sort of politics with legislation. And, neither of those things, by the way, are good. Like, I mean, the whole point of the legislative process is, somebody introduces a bill. It should be the bill that they want it to be. And then their colleagues will debate it, and it'll get amended, and it'll get to where it gets to have some level of consensus, and then it'll pass, right? And so it shouldn't be short circuited out the gate like that. That fundamentally undermines the entire process. And so, and yet that to some degree is going on with LRC. And I'm kind of like, yeah, it's not so good, right? Like
It's not
that's
good.
not so good. So,
No, it's not so good. Well, hey, Chris, thank you.
Well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
be in touch, and I know that we've got the Saturday rally, and
we'll be speaking at the Saturday rally. You'll be Shane Baker. We'll be speaking there as well. With you, I believe there's a few others, but yeah, I know those are the two I booked for the rally.
And then we've got I've got court next Monday, and
we'll catch up with you then.
All right, sounds good, man. Thanks.
All right, we'll see you. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I was in the title of this, I said I was going to talk about the free speech and some other things after Chris got off. But you know what? I'm going to hold that till next week. We've already been going for an hour and 15 minutes, but I had a fantastic conversation. I hope you guys did too as well. We dropped a couple links. One's for GoFundMe. Please, please, please give some money to Chris. He does this work pro bono for the most part, unless he wins, and then the state gives him money. But he does this work pro bono if he loses most of the time. And so for that reason, please donate to his GoFundMe. That covers the cost of things like witnesses and things like that. As well, we dropped a petition to discipline Judge Shepard. Chris is in no way attached to that, but we just wanted to throw that up there so that way if you wanted to somehow feel like you're fighting and pushing back on what the courts are doing, you can go ahead and do that as well. But please support us, guys. Come by the shop. Go online. Brewedco.com, BREWEDCO.com. Check that out, guys. And I thank you so much for joining me. Have a great evening.